Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November recording of Miss Dr. Kenya. I feel like I say I'm excited every time I do a recording, but I am. I'm actually excited this time around too, because for the first time, we are going to have a parent to join me and a member of the Youth Council. And this month, we are talking about the connection between mental health and learning. But before we get into our conversation, I do want to stop and pause and allow first our member of our youth council to introduce herself. And then I am going to ask our first ever parent to introduce himself to everyone. So Ms. Fola, if you could introduce yourself to our YouTube audience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fola. I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior.
Thank you, Fola.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory, and I am the father of four boys, ages 14, 9, and then I also have a set of twins that are 7.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Fola, for joining me today. Again, we're going to talk about the connection between mental health and learning. And before we get into our conversation, I just have a basic question, and that is, are either of you aware that there is, in fact, a connection between mental health and learning?
Um,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. I definitely think that there's a connection between mental health and learning. Um, I think the state of your mental health affects your motivation and your functioning towards learning. Um, I think the better your mental health is, I think the more motivation you have and the more you function. And then I think the worse your mental health is, the less you can function and the less you have motivation.
Yes, I actually agree with Fola. To piggyback on to what she said, your mental condition can definitely play a role into, how motivated you are into learning, and also the capacity you have to learn. There are diagnoses that exist, which causes certain individuals to learn at a slower pace than others. So I definitely believe that there is a connection between mental health and learning.
Ooh, thank you guys both for your responses. If I did not know any better, I would think that y'all were related to educators and mental health professionals, or y'all had some type of inside track that other people don't have. But thank you. I absolutely agree with that. And there have been a series of commercials that the company Snickers has done. I don't know if you guys have seen any of them, but it talks about how you're not yourself when you're hungry. Have you guys ever seen any of those commercials?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw both of you nodding your head. There is one Snickers commercial that I get a good laugh out of every time. It is a young man who is trying to learn how to ride not just ride his bike, but do stunts on his bicycle. And he is struggling with that thing. And his friend comes up and gives him a Snicker. So I appreciate that particular video because it's very simple, but it demonstrates exactly what you guys were talking about. It is hard for you to apply what you know, to focus, to be motivated, to demonstrate what you have learned when you are feeling some type of way, to include hangry, right? So I feel like as adults, we all understand that when we are hungry, like we can't focus and we can't concentrate. But for some reason, when it comes to children and youth, I think that we forget that. Greg, why do you think that adults have a hard time understanding that just like their emotions and their thoughts, when they find themselves in spaces that aren't the best spaces, that they aren't able to, sit through a long meeting, for example, and focus. Why is it hard for them to understand that our children and youth have the same experience?
I think there are a multitude of reasons. I think that um, as we've gotten older and become adults, we've kind of forgotten what it was like to be children, and what it was like, what it was like when we were younger. And then there's also a disconnect of, what is transpiring in today's day and age, in today's society. When we were children, we weren't exposed to nearly as much as the children are these days. And so we tend to just kind of ignore what is going on in today's day and age. And, we tend to always, like, as you always hear, well, when I was your age, I was able to do this, that, and the third. And, kind of just setting aside of what is partaking in today's present time.
Thank you. That was very insightful. There is a definite disconnect between um, where we are now and the things that our children are experiencing in their day-to-day lives. Fola, from your perspective, right, in your conversations with your parents, and they tell you, like Gregory was saying, back in the day, we did this, that, and the third. What do you think that adults are missing? Like, what is unique to your generation that perhaps we aren't considering when it comes to mental health?
Um, well, I definitely think a lot of adults in the previous generation talk about how, I guess, hard their lives were. And I think it's because they think that we have a lot more resources and like technologies and social media that is kind of handed to us. And I think that they think that it does make our lives easier, but also I think it could add a lot of emotional stress onto us. Like what we see on social media definitely affects the way you think about yourself, or, you know, just like put standards up that a lot of children feel like they have to follow. And I don't think adults take that into account just because they think it's easier for us, I guess, now.
Ooh, Fola, thank you for putting me in my place, because I think I, up until that very statement, have been one of the adults that feels like you guys do have it easier. But what I did not consider is that with that improved technology, for lack of better words, also comes its own set of obstacles and hindrances that I had not considered. So thank you for that. I appreciate you for that reframe and helping me and other adults to understand that just because technology answers some of the things and some of the questions that we sat with does not mean that it does not present like new scenarios and new difficulties that we aren't even aware of, because it's not our life. I appreciate you for that. Um, I kind of want to follow up on that question though, and just ask you, like, what are some of the things that come up for you um in your day-to-day life? Like what emotions do you find yourself sitting with and experiencing often?
Um, I would say a lot of stress. I think that's the number one thing. Just from school, it's a lot of pressures, to do well. I would say frustration because it's when you put yourself, I guess when you hold yourself to a standard and you're not meeting that standard, it's hard because you're frustrated with yourself and what others might think, your parents, people who you respect. And I guess um maybe a lot of like guilt, I would say. Those three emotions.
Okay, and those were all very powerful emotions. Thank you, first and foremost, for being vulnerable to be able to share that with me. I appreciate you for that. And Fola, I have to say that you can't be the only one. When we look at the numbers and the statistics for what's happening with children and youth around your age, between 9 to 18, I know you're on the older end of that spectrum, But we see that anxiety happens to be like the number one disorder. And so when I hear you say stuff like, frustration and guilt, all of those things are synonymous with anxiety. So you're not the only one feeling that way as you strive to be your best self. But congratulations to you for striving to be your best self and for hanging in there. What do you do when you find yourself sitting with those emotions? How do you get yourself back to your baseline when you're feeling more like yourself again?
Um, Normally I would talk to a trusted adult. I would talk to my parents, they're a good outlet. I feel like sometimes when you talk to your friends, I mean, it's a good ear, like they're gonna listen to you, but I don't think they'll help you move forward. They don't give you guidance on where to go. So I'll talk to someone I trust. And normally, if I'm stressed out, I'll just try to step back, not try to put it all on me, do something I like doing and something that makes me happy so I can get back into the right mindset in order to deal with whatever I have to deal with.
Very good. Very good. That's exactly what you should do. And I'm glad that you know that and have the presence of mind to do that. I'm also very grateful that you have trusted adults in your circle that you feel like you can go to and talk to about all the things, because not everybody has that. Greg, I'm curious, when you are with your sons, you have four sons ranging from high school to elementary school. When you are with them and they, are demonstrating some of the frustration that Fola just um, shared with us, how do you kind of help them work their way back to themselves?
Um, Typically it starts with just having a simple conversation with them, talking to them. I feel like in parenting, it sometimes get lost in raising children that, that sometimes it's just, if you just have a simple conversation with your child, they'll share with you what is wrong. And then from there, depending upon what is bothering them, then you then proceed on in different avenues. Perhaps if it's some type of frustration, you know, um, you know, create some type of environment or activity for them to kind of come back down to their base level. Or if it's some type of sadness, consoling them in whichever way is comfortable between the two of you. But it definitely just starts with just asking questions, having the conversation with them, and then proceeding on from there.
Yeah, from my experience, the most powerful thing you can do for anyone is to let them know that they are seen and to let them know that they are heard. So if you are doing those things, believe it or not, you are offering your young person like the most powerful intervention that there is, right? Just to let them know that their anger, their frustration is understood, and then to start to give them some of the strategies and skills to work around it. But I want to take a deeper dive. So we've talked about how the emotions that we experience, but I want to help people make that connection to learning. How does mental health affect learning? Well, one thing that comes up for me is just thinking about like when you sit down to do homework. That can be a very frustrating time for families, especially if your student is trying to work through a problem that they just, for whatever the reason is, they're not getting. It's hard for them to understand. And I remember as a parent, my daughter will be 27 in December, so it has been some time. But I do remember sometimes when my daughter was coming up and going in school, they were teaching something known as the Common Core math, and it didn't make sense to me. It did not make sense to me. So I would start to get frustrated because I'm thinking to myself, what is this? Like, why don't we just do, 2 + 2 is 4 and keep it pushing instead of all of these different rules that they had? But I respect that people learn in different ways. And so they try to teach math in a different way. But as a parent, I didn't understand the Common Core. I, was raised back in the day when you pulled out the abacus and, 2 on one line and 2 on the other, that equals 4, and we kept it moving. But now they are starting to teach like different ways to learn math. And for a parent, that might be new to me. And so it's interesting where you can have a dynamic where both the student and the parent are both sitting there frustrated as you work through a particular problem. So how does that show up, and how does that impact your ability and your student's ability, like to complete a worksheet, if you're both sitting there frustrated? What do you do in those instances? For me, quite honestly, I do what both Fola and Greg have kind of hinted at. Like, it's okay to set it down and to come back, right? I think that sometimes we want to like press through and keep going, but sometimes that can be counterproductive. So if you find yourself in a situation when you are frustrated and your student is frustrated, it's time to take a time out and you both walk away, do all of the things that Fola and Greg have described, and then come back when cooler heads are prevailed and you can really think. So let's talk about this. How does mental health affect learning? When we started our conversation, I showed you guys a commercial of a video that Sneakers had did that talked about how the young person, because he was hungry, he wasn't able to do tricks on his bikes that he clearly knew how to do, because once he had the Snickers, he ate it and then was able to do the tricks and to do them well. So there are many, many, many theories that talk about the connection between mental health and learning. But for those of you who know me and been following me on Instagram and Facebook, I am a lover of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Greg, Fola, are either one of you aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Have you heard of those things?
I've heard about it. I think we talked about it in school briefly, but that was like years ago, so I'm not too fresh on the subject.
No problem, Greg.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did talk about it, but I might have been asleep in class when that, because it definitely leaves me. I don't, but I'm interested to learn about it.
Okay, so that's a great example of how if you're not making those connections, you aren't able to learn. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically says that before that we can learn, right? Maslow specifically uses the term self-actualize. But self-actualize is showing up in the school setting, paper there with you, pen sharpened, interested, ready to learn, arms folded, and full attention in front of the teacher, right? So Maslow says before we can get there, we have some basic needs that have to be met. And the most basic need, as the Snickers commercial hints to, is food, clothing, shelter, right? Hangry is a real thing. So even after we have our food, clothing, shelter, right? We wake up in the morning, we have breakfast, we leave a home that, is warm and, meeting our needs. We then have a need for safety, right? So for some of our young people, once they leave their homes, some of them have to walk to school, and some are walking in environments where they do not feel safe. Some are standing at a bus stop right next to their bully. They don't feel safe. So though they have food, clothing, shelter, because they don't feel safe, when they get to school, their mind is all over the place. They're not able to focus. But let's say you leave the house, you drive to school with your parents, you feel completely safe. You get to school, the next thing is a sense of belonging. When I get to school, I need to have me a group of friends who are there looking for me, waiting for me, saying, hey, Fola, how you doing? Hey, Greg, how you doing? Right? I need to know that there's a group of people here that are checking for me, that I belong somewhere in here. Then once I have those things, I can feel good about me. So Maslow calls that self-esteem needs. And then I can show up to school ready to learn. But I cannot show up to school ready to learn unless I have my basic needs met. I feel safe. There's a sense of belonging. I feel good about me, then and only then can I self-actualize. Does that make sense, Greg? Did I bore you with that? Was my 20-second explanation, was that good? Did it resonate with you?
Yes, yes, it resonated with me.
Okay, and Fola, does that sound somewhat consistent with what you heard in school a few years ago?
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about the connection between mental health and learning, I feel like Maslow really gives us a very simple way of thinking about that thing. At the end of the day, if we don't have our basic needs met, you can forget about learning because we're not there. Our mind is preoccupied with all of the other things going on in our life. And we are not able to focus. We are not able to pay attention. We are not able to concentrate. And those are all the things that we need to learn. So